Good morning again. It is good. It's good to be worshiping with you, even if it's online. It is a reality that we are still in the middle of, which no one thinks is the ideal. No one at all. And during this time, we found that some of the best can come out of us, but more often than not, there's a lot of us who are struggling and a lot of us who aren't at our best. And in some way, this virus has revealed some of the struggles that exist within our hearts. One of the things that we spent some time discussing last week is our commitment as people who follow the way of Jesus to not let that play out in our church. Because we're at a weird position where we have a church in which there are multiple opinions on what we should be doing next, what the next step should look like. In some ways, the fault line of our country kind of works its way into our church. But we are people who are committed to let the Spirit work in us, to let us be people who have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, so that we don't let that get the best of us. So as a church, we are still in this time in which our worship is online. And we don't have a date when that's going to change. We hope and we think it's probably going to be in the next few weeks. We hope and we think it's going to be in the month of June that we're going to be able to offer both an online and an in-person worship service that you can choose which the right one is for you. But whatever we choose individually, we choose that we are never going to give in to villainizing someone who has a different perspective than us, and we're not going to shame someone because they make a different decision from us. And so whatever happens in terms of time and date, which if there's anything that's changed in my life over the last 2 or 3 months, is that I've become far quicker to say the phrase, Lord willing, because I realize just how little control I have. And so during this time in which we don't have control, one thing that we will not give into is the temptation to judge and to shame each other. So in some ways, this season has brought out a lot of that judgment and shame. But it's also given us a unique opportunity that I want to talk about today. This time in which we're reimagining as things start to open back up and begin the process of open up, that there's an opportunity for us here. And I want to talk about that today. First, let me tell you a story about a woman named Mary. Mary Magdalene is introduced to us in Luke's Gospel in chapter 8. And Mary Magdalene has within her 7 demons. And then she meets Jesus, and an exorcism takes place. Now, in my professional opinion, exorcisms usually bring out the worst in us. But when done well, they create a sense of connection. And that's exactly what happened to Mary. After these 7 spirits were taken from her by Jesus, she's connected to Jesus. And she holds on to Jesus and stays with him through everything. She follows him even to the very end, where she is one of the few who stays with Jesus until he breathes his last on the cross. And then just a few days later, she's there at the empty tomb. She and Mary, Jesus' mother, are there to anoint Jesus' body, only to find that it's not there. And when they're there, what they encounter is not the body of Jesus, but angels. And maybe something happens to you when you have demons inside of you that have been exorcised, that you feel confident enough to argue with an angel, but that's what happens to Mary. She starts arguing with these angels about where Jesus' body should be and what they've done with him. And then in the midst of this argument, the resurrected Jesus appears. But Mary Magdalene, the one who has held on to Jesus through everything, doesn't recognize Jesus until Jesus says her name. And these are the words from John's gospel about what Jesus says to her. In John chapter 20, verse 17, it says this. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And so Jesus starts with this very peculiar command. Do not hold on to me, which is what Mary has done for no short amount of time. She's held on to Jesus through thick and thin. But now Jesus says to Mary, don't hold on to me. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, what you experience right now, what you are holding on to right now is good. But there's something better yet to come. And Jesus says this about his resurrected self. The resurrected Jesus says there's more that you can't see yet. So don't hold on to what's right in front of you. Now, we're in this series talking about the distant country in which the prodigal son leaves his father's home and goes away. And we often think about like the idea of the prodigal leaving or going to the distant country is something we do when we have a drunken bender in Las Vegas, and that's what the prodigal does. But the distant country is where each and every one of us goes when we are distant from God's intention for us. And one of the ways that we become distant from God's intention for us is because we hold on to things that we don't need to hold on to. That we hold on to maybe what's right in front of us when God has something more for us. And it doesn't look like being in the pig pen like the prodigal son, but we are no longer located in God's best for us when we do that. And I think we're at a unique time in which this is a chance for us to reevaluate what we're holding on to. Let me show you this picture right here. This is a picture that some of you will recognize what this 843-acre plot is right here in the middle. This is Central Park. Yes, we know this much better than we know about the town of Jericho, which you guys didn't help me with a few weeks ago. Not that I'm letting go of that one. But nevertheless, this is 843 acres known as Central Park. And if you've ever had the opportunity to go to New York City and to spend any time in Central Park, you know this place is like this magical place. In the middle of the hustle and the bustle of New York City, there are 843 acres that are used for everything from ice skating to yoga to runners to rollerbladers to festivals. And millions of people come to New York City and spend time in Central Park every year. Some simply just want to retrace the steps of their favorite movie, which has a scene here in Central Park. And all of this is available because there's a decision to be made years ago. In some ways, Central Park is like the Sabbath for the soul of the New York City region. And this Sabbath is available now for the soul of New York City because in the 1850s, people decided that we're going to say no to all that this could become. There are estimates that this is literally billions of dollars worth of real estate that could be used for residential or commercial development. But they all say no to that because they're saying yes to something in this place. The idea of Sabbath or Shabbat comes from Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, God creates the earth on 6 days, and then on day 7, God rests. And God does a lot of great stuff for the first 6 days. The stars and the moon, that's pretty amazing. Separating the waters to create the dry land, that's pretty amazing. For 6 days. But we can all look back and go, on day 7, there's a lot of stuff God could have done. On day 7, God could have made I-35 without traffic. Miracles could happen. On day 7, God could have made Chipotle. Like that would have been great for a lot of people to have that early on. But on day 7, God says no to making more. It says no. Because unless you experience the pain of saying no, you will never experience the joy of truly being able to say yes. If you can't say no, if you don't say no to certain things, you will never be able to say yes to the most important things. Jesus tells a story about 3 servants who by their master were given different amounts of money, different amounts of talents. And the first 2 go invest their talents and they make money for their master and everyone's happy in the end. But the one with the least amount of resources, the one with simply 1 talent, doesn't invest it at all. And maybe the reason that this servant was so afraid to invest and wasn't able to invest is because he saw all the options in front of him and all the things that he wanted to say yes to. And he was paralyzed by all the choices. And so since he couldn't say no to all the different options, he was never able to say yes to one. Because unless you can experience the dissatisfaction of saying no to something that you probably want, you'll never be able to experience the joyful contentment that comes from saying yes to what's most important. In the 1850s, developers of New York City were able to say no to all that those 843 acres could be. Mary was able to say no to holding on to the resurrected Jesus because she believed the ascending Jesus had something even better. But if you don't say no, you'll never experience it. And during this time in this season in which many of us are kind of coming out of being quarantined away from people, as we're starting to imagine maybe what is life going to look like going forward, and for some of us it'll happen sooner than others, but we're all having to ask the question of what am I going to do when things kind of change again? And we have our new normal. We're reimagining. My family, our girls are kind of reimagining what their sports are going to look like. I'm reimagining kind of some routines that I've had for work. And as we're reimagining, we have to figure out what is the yes that we want to say is most important. And that's not always an easy thing to do. It's not always easy to establish what is most important. I've got a good friend of mine from Arkansas named Jonathan, and he and I were having a public conversation that many people would listen to. And during this conversation, my friend Jonathan says this little nugget to me, which up until that moment, I had no idea, even though he's been one of my dearest friends for a decade. And he says to me, Luke, I have a ranking of my 10 most important best friends. I have a power ranking of my 10 closest friends. To which, of course, I say, let's hear the list. And so my friend Jonathan from Arkansas says his most important friend is a guy named Bub. Now, if you've ever been to Arkansas and you say the word Bub, that elicits attention from like half the population, though the majority of the population doesn't know what the word illicit means. Nevertheless, top one, Bub. Number two, Bad Brad. Leave that name alone. Third, Michael P. Fourth is Rick, his and my former boss, and then I'm number 5. Then he had 6 through 10, but they didn't really matter to me because I was better than them, so I didn't listen to those. But I had a few questions that came to my mind after he says this list of his 10 favorite friends. First, who says this kind of thing publicly? Like, what is wrong with you? Who would ever say this publicly? But then I realized that we've all made the same decision, right? If you've ever had to put your speed dial in your phone or your favorites in your phone, you've done the same thing. And for those of you who are dying for a pop culture reference, here's one for you. You remember when you were on MySpace, you had your top 8 friends? It's the same thing. And for as bad as it seems to say that these are the relationships that I'm going to prioritize, these are the people I'm going to invest the most in, Jesus kind of does the same thing. Only 12 people get to be his disciples, the apostles that walk with him. And of those 12, Jesus has 3 that are his closest, Peter, James, and John. And for many of us who don't prioritize the relationships that are most central to us, what we experience is an absence of true depth of relationship. And what is in abundance is a bunch of shallow interactions. There's a bit of proverbial wisdom that Jesus gives in Matthew 7 on this subject, and Jesus says this. He says, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you. Jesus says, not everyone is deserving of your best. Not everything deserves the same level of importance. Because if you don't know what you have to say yes to, and you don't know what you're willing to say no to, the things that are of the utmost importance will never happen. You won't experience the fullness of what they are. And during this time and this season, as we're starting to imagine what does a reopened life look like for us, now more than ever, we have to figure out what are the things that we have to say yes to. What are the things that are central to who we are and the kind of people that we need to become? And I can't give you the simple answer. I can't tell you this is the 3 steps to figure that out. But what I want to give you today are 2 questions to help you process the things that you have to say yes to and the things that you're willing to say no to. 2 questions. First one, can it be done again? First question is this: can it be done again? Let's go back to the story from John 20. And this is Jesus talking to Mary. He says, "Do not hold on to me because I have not yet ascended to the Father." Can it be done again? So Mary's thinking, I have lost you, Jesus, once, and I don't want to let go of you because I don't want to lose you again. And maybe what Jesus is saying to her is that don't hold on to what's right in front of you because God can do it again. Because I feel like I'm gone, but I can come back. The problem is we often hold on to too tightly what's right in front of us. The old saying is that possession is 9/10 of the law. But what many of us have experienced is that what is right in front of us possesses us to an inordinate amount. That what we see right now, what we experienced in this moment, has so much control over us. Because we don't believe it can be done again. And so for some of us, God has worked this miracle in our life. And we got to the point where we are right now. And we can't imagine that God could do that same thing again in us. That God got us to this place where we're able to forgive this person. Or we were able to be generous or vulnerable or open. But we can't imagine doing it again. And so what we do is we hold on to what's right in front of us. Because really we don't trust that God can do again what God has already done in our life. We trust that God got us to where we are right now, and so we hold on to it. And we're never able to receive, and we're never able to say yes to what God wants to do again in us. So the first question is, can it be done again? The second question is, can it be taken away from us? Can it be taken away from us? There's a story about another woman also named Mary, who her and her sister Martha had an unexpected visit by Jesus. And so Mary sits at the feet of Jesus like a disciple, learning and just listening. And Martha is the responsible one. She's taking care of everything. She's getting the house ready. She's preparing a meal. She's doing all the right things that you're supposed to do when you have unexpected house guests. But watch what Jesus says to her. But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." You can do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of activity. You can be very, very busy. But it can all be focused on things that can be taken away from you. What Martha did could be taken away, but what Mary did will never leave her. So my question for you is, are you saying yes to the things that can't be taken away from you? Or are you investing yourself in things that will be taken away from you? Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount decries the flaw of investing your life in things of this world. When he says this, "Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal." Jesus isn't against nice things for the sake of just being against nice things. Jesus says don't hold on to things that can be taken away from you. And some of us had said yes so much to things that when it comes down to what really matters, in those moments in which things are finally revealed for what they are, you will realize that those are things that are going to be gone. Are you saying yes to things that can be taken away from you? Can it be done again? Can be taken away from you? Here's a bit of proverbial wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 6:11 says this: The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? The more the words, the less the meaning. And this was written before there was 24-hour cable news, which had to fill 24 hours of content every day. But they knew enough to say the more the words, the less the meaning. And this was written before there were social media sites that made us feel like we had to keep talking all the time. But they knew the more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? And sometimes what we end up doing is we say yes to so many things. We say yes to so many things that our life loses its meaning because we aren't able to be present for what matters the most. And the more activity and the more busyness and the more commitments that you have, sometimes you get to the point where does that profit anyone? Now, obviously, Jesus says it's better to give than receive. It's better to give your time away. It's better to give your research. It's better to give your life away, obviously. But at some point, we're saying yes to so many things that we're never able to really be present for any of it. Einstein once said that things should be as simple as possible and no simpler. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. Eventually, you need to simplify things until what really matters is all that's there. And one of the reasons that we end up finding ourselves in the distant country is because we don't know what to say no to. And we say yes to a lot of really good things, a lot of really valuable things that appear to us that they deserve our time and our attention. But eventually, we start to migrate away from the place where we trust that God's presence is always with us, and all that God has is ours, and that's enough. If you can't say